Hello. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. This is night 3 for 3 of sold out in-store events, and it's been so lovely seeing this room full of people celebrating all of these fantastic books. So my name is Amali, and I'm the events director here at Books Are Magic. We are so excited to have Temim Fruchter and Mara Wilson with us tonight to celebrate the launch of Temim's debut novel, City of Laughter. Before we get officially started, I just have a few logistics to point out for how tonight's event is going to go. First off, we will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the discussion, so please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After the talk tonight, Temim will be signing and personalizing books at the alcove next to where you checked in. We'll let you know where and when to start lining up for that. And lastly, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we would love to encourage you to buy a copy of City of Laughter online using the link in the live stream description. Now, let's get into this. City of Laughter spans across generations and continents to tell the stories of Shiva Margolin and her ancestors and the small town of Ropshitz, Poland, known as the City of Laughter. This book is filled to the brim with warmth and tenderness, an incredible amount of history and folklore, and I'm sure hours upon hours of research, and incredibly well-rounded and complex characters. It feels crazy that this is Temim's first book, and yet she did that, and she's here to tell you all about it. Yeah. So I'm just going to read their bios quickly, and they're going to come on out and give y'all a little reading. So Temim Fruchter is a queer non-binary writer who was raised in a modern Orthodox Jewish household. She holds an MFA in fiction from the University of Maryland and has received first prize in short fiction from both American Literary Review and New South. She's also a 2020 Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award winner. She lives here in Brooklyn, New York. As I mentioned earlier, Mara Wilson joins Temim in conversation tonight. Mara is an actress, writer, and audiobook narrator. Her breakout roles include Natalie Hillard in Mrs. Doubtfire, Susan Walker in Miracle on 34th Street, and of course, Matilda in Matilda. She, of course, is also the audiobook narrator of City of Laughter and will be graciously reading a bit for us tonight with Temim. Okay, that is all from me. Without any further delay, please join me in giving Temim and Mara a very warm welcome.
Hello, and thank you very much for coming to this event. I am so happy to be here, and I'm so happy to be celebrating this wonderful book. Can we have another round of applause for Temim's wonderful book, please? Thank you.
Should we start with a reading?
Yeah, let's do that. So should I start with the prologue, or do you want to go first?
I'll read and then pass it along.
Yes, that's good. That's good.
In a nonlinear timeline, I'll start from the middle and then you'll do the beginning.
Let's do that. That feels fitting.
Okay. So I'm going to read from the middle of this book. All you need to know is that the character Shiva has received a fellowship to go to do some research in Warsaw, and she has also just been brutally dumped. And her dad has died, and she's not in the greatest way. She should buy tickets, she thought, or none of this would be real, and it should be ceremonial. So she went to pour a drink for the occasion. The section of her counter she affectionately called her bar was dreadfully spare. Just some brandy, an ancient bottle of limoncello whose provenance was a mystery, and the end of a bottle of Maker's. She used to keep vermouth on hand for when she had Danny over, along with Danny's 2 favorite simple syrups, saffron and cardamom, fancy-ass sugar water, she'd called them. But Shiva had torn through those once Danny's visits had diminished and then entirely ceased. She put an ice cube in a former olive jar and poured the bourbon over it. Then she sat down on the couch again with her laptop. Warsaw. She knew the ghetto, of course, the uprising, of course, but now she imagined squat, square buildings and Holocaust tour groups, gray weather and faces saturated with despair, pierogi maybe, Stone, memorials, monuments, stern sky. What else did they eat in Poland? Who lived there now? She image searched Warsaw. Shiva had seen mostly old pictures of the city and was surprised every time she looked at a contemporary one, the touristy old town with its Disney colorful turrets and cobblestones. The Warsaw in her mind was grayscale. She tried to imagine Mira, her great-grandmother, against one of these fantastical landscapes. She searched Rupschitz, which brought up a handful of images of Naftali Tzvi Horowitz, the famous Badchen they called the Laughing Rabbi, the one Hannah, her mother, would invoke every time Shiva burst out with her signature cackle in public. Then she searched Rupschitze, using the contemporary Polish spelling of the town, and there, more hypercolor images, nothing like the warm and moonlit Eastern European village-scapes she'd always imagined. She entered the March dates she hoped to travel and winced at the prices. She should buy the ticket before they got even higher. She was starting to feel wiggly from the whiskey and hadn't even begun to think about dinner. Drunker than she should be on a Wednesday, she let her cursor hover dangerously over purchase ticket. In some past life, she would have texted Danny about this, but there was nothing to say to Danny anymore. Nothing left to talk about. Shiva's face ached now from the back and forth choreography of crying and trying not to cry. She turned to her glass, but it was empty. She felt lonely and sorry for herself. In her old apartment, she might have been distracted by the din of roommates cooking, gossiping, around the clink of wine glasses on a night like tonight. She might have even confided in one. But here, in her one bedroom, it was just her and the weather. She picked up her phone again, considered Instagram, started to type Danny's name, and then heard her best friend Levi saying, "Unfollow her already." She couldn't quite, not just yet, but in homage to her best friend's wisdom, she closed Instagram, instead letting her drunken thumb scroll over to the dating app. No, she thought. Why? But it was a hazy, easy way to pass the time. She swiped left a dozen times out of habit, rejecting the same Brooklyn profiles she'd seen before, none of whom were Danny. Then, suddenly remembering her conversation with Levi, she updated her settings to within 25 miles of Warsaw, Poland. The idea of romance in Eastern Europe still dazzling, like it could be just the right kind of distraction. As it had before, the instinct boomeranged into shame. Not even a plane ticket yet? Fresh out of a relationship and already trying to scheme intrigue in the place where her people's collective trauma still hung in the air? What would Mira say, she wondered. The shame, though, was fleeting. She was tipsy and giggled at the thought because who knew what Mira would say? Not Hannah, that's for sure. Cruising in Poland felt wrong and thus thrilling. She swiped left and left again. Magda with the rainbow scarf. Sophia, whose face was partially obstructed by a tree. Alma, who looked bored and had a dog. Christine on a Fulbright from Cleveland, touristy photo and overeager grin. PhD student, barista, music teacher, vet's assistant. Left, left, left. Shiva picked up her empty glass, willing someone to top her off, but she knew she'd killed the makers and that she should be responsible and eat instead. Left, left, left. The universe telling her that her fantasy had been tasteless and off base. Her thumb kept swiping as though she could swipe Danny out of her phone and her consciousness by swiping her way through all of Poland. Just 10 more, she thought, just until 8:05. No, 8:07. Left, left, left. And wait, this one. Shiva's thumb stopped. No full name, just the initial G. A face made of severe angles and a swatch of black lash over bright green eyes. Shiva tightened at the throat. G. What did it stand for? She scrolled down to the profile. There wasn't much. Self-summary, motorcycles, old films, theater. Next to I value, just a little rainbow flag icon and a moon. There was only one other photo. G next to a motorcycle, helmet under her right arm. I'll never find someone with Danny's kind of swagger, she'd told Levi, crying one whiskeyed recent night. This, though, was someone else's kind of swagger. And she could feel her temples getting hotter, her tired thumbprint beating as she swiped right. She felt like she should hear bells or be congratulated on some abstract mission accomplished, or at least like someone should bring her another drink, but it was fairly anticlimactic. Swipe right and wait. She switched back to the travel tab she still had open, the round-trip ticket she'd selected but not yet paid for still staring back at her from the screen. The department money wouldn't come through for another couple of weeks, but she had just enough in savings to buy the ticket. Don't overthink it, she thought. One simple click, and suddenly I'm a person who's going to Poland. She felt momentarily existential, re-forgot and re-remembered dinner, realized she had to get off the couch before she disappeared into a lightweight whiskey-fueled vortex and clicked purchase. She texted Levi, "Holy shit, I bought a ticket. I'm going to Warsaw." Then, wobbly and flimsy-headed, she walked to the kitchen, ecstatic to remember the rotisserie chicken still sitting on her counter. She didn't know that the coming days would bring a near constant exchange of text messages with a stranger called G, the unfettered note passing between them as giddy as a slumber party. For now, though, it was very late in Brooklyn, and Shiva was already fast asleep when her phone dinged to announce that she had a match somewhere across the ocean and a message that simply said, "Hello." Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to read a little bit from the prologue. So what you need to know about this is that Baruch works as a barchanim, and it is, what year is it? It is, or around what time with it is Baruch?
18th century.
18th century, yes. And one more time I have to ask, this is something I had to ask, is it Nehemiah? Nehemiah. Nehemiah. Okay, so yes. I'm out of practice with Hebrew school. All right. So after the wedding, Baruch headed to the exit at the back of the synagogue. He would go see Bluma, who might still be hanging out the clothes. Baruch had loved Bluma since they were children. "Ask her to marry you already, Baruchel," said his mother. "No tzaddik would dally like this." His mother, an efficient woman, was frustrated by her boy's leisurely pace in such an unleisurely world. And Baruch would ask Bluma one day. He knew this, but not yet. With marriage, Baruch imagined, came a heavier kind of responsibility. He didn't yet want to relinquish the constant feelings of anticipation that animated his days, wondering whether he might catch Bluma for a brief and quiet hello as the sun sank, and walk home nostril drunk with the faint notes of honey he could always smell on her hair. He didn't want to relinquish romance altogether, worried it would disappear once he and Bluma made such a serious commitment. Baruch, it is told, was astonished to push open the door out the back of the synagogue to the courtyard, only to be met with a green-eyed man wearing a bright blue jacket. When people tell the story, they tell of a man. I, of course, no different. "It's locked," said the man, whose voice was higher than a man's but deeper than a boy's. He was jaunty, leaning tall against the synagogue's back gate, and I couldn't get back inside again either, so it would appear I'm stuck right here. "Hello," said Baruch, self-conscious. There are no strangers in Ropshitz. "It's always locked. I work a lot of weddings, so I know how to open it." "I see," said the man. "I'm just passing through. Maybe you can show me the way to the nearest inn? I'd rather not sleep in the synagogue courtyard." The green in his eyes was alarming, and his wavy hair stood almost straight up. "Of course," said Baruch. Reb Nehemiah's. I can walk you." He would see Bluma tomorrow. His curiosity about the blue-jacketed stranger had him by the shoulders. The stranger's nose was angular and certain. His gait, almost a trot. He wore no skull cap. He had no beard. His cheeks, smooth as Baruch's sisters', shone in the light of dusk. "So," Baruch said, as though he walked men in clothing brighter than Joseph's coat to the inn after weddings every night, "what brings you to Ropshitz?" "Well," said the stranger, "it's a long story." The darkening sky was beginning to reveal the moon, just past 3/4 full. The wind drew the grass gently prostrate toward the dirt. Perhaps the proximity of the divine, or perhaps simply the weather. "I have time," Baruch said. There was at least half a mile left until the inn. "I get the feeling this town doesn't get too many visitors." Evasive stranger, Baruch thought. Baruch knew Ropshitz down to every crack in its well-worn walkways, from the synagogue to the market to the woods and back, but blue jacket in the corner of his vision, Baruch felt now like he was walking somewhere he had never been. Everyone at that wedding looked at me like I was from another world, which isn't unfair, I suppose. It was someone else's wedding. I wasn't invited. "You're right, we don't get many visitors," said Baruch. He kicked a pile of pebbles with his scuffed brown wedding shoe, and they sprayed outward. Not much to see here. The stranger glanced up. Well, you do have the moon here, don't you? And it's shining beautifully tonight. So, already, not so bad. Baruch felt the corners of his mouth tease upward, charmed. He screwed up his courage. So? He didn't repeat the question. Well, I can't tell you much, said the stranger. Do you have mail service here in Ropshitz? Of course, said Baruch. Reb Yankel brings the mail in parcels most Thursdays. Sometimes when the weather is bad, every other Thursday. Baruch sped his steps. Enough talk about the mail and the weather. Why? Well, said the stranger, that's like what I do. I bring deliveries from one place to another. Packages, messages, information. He paused. Sometimes more powerful things. Baruch couldn't imagine what this meant. He knew that a boy on his street had herbs and tinctures sent from afar because the local doctor couldn't cure what he had. He knew that the woman who saw disturbing visions sometimes, the one on whom the rabbi had given up, had scrolls and potions sent to her from a healer in a neighboring village, a last attempt to extract the evil presence from her blood. He didn't like to think about it. What do you mean, powerful things? The stranger looked back up at the sky. Really beautiful night tonight, isn't it, Baruch? Baruch turned sharply. How do you know my name? Word gets around in a small town. But you don't live here, thought Baruch. There are no strangers in Ropshitz. Are there? Then, sudden and sure, the stranger took Baruch's hand, laced his slender fingers through Baruch's thick ones. Baruch dizzied, skin singing. A man didn't take another man's hand, not unless they were dancing in a circle at a wedding. The stranger's grip was firm. Come this way, he said. Where? Baruch said helplessly, knowing he would follow, no matter the answer. Leaving it in a mysterious place, I think.
I love to leave it in a mysterious place.
You do indeed. You do indeed. So, what was the genesis of this novel exactly? Do you think that it was? I know that you have traveled to Poland, right?
I have traveled to Poland. I would say there are several genocide to this novel. There are a few. So one, yes, I used to play in a rock band, and we toured and we traveled to Europe and we went to Warsaw. We played in Warsaw, and it was after many, many, many weeks of playing in Germany. And there was like just such a marked difference when we went to Warsaw. It just felt like warmer and more familiar. And I was like, why does it feels this way? For some reasons I can explain, and some reasons that I can't explain, because even though I'm an Eastern European Polish descended Jew, I've never been here. But anyway, since we were there, we traveled to Ropshitz, which is the very real shtetl that my maternal great grandparents are from. And we went there and we stood there, and it was literally just like grass and a road. And I had this dual experience, which, maybe other diasporic people going back to places where their families are from might have, where on one hand, it's like, oh, this is charged and there are ghosts here and there's a presence here and I'm connected. And on the other hand, it's literally just a road, And so I think part of this book started from that ambivalence of it both is what you think it is and it's also entirely not. And then another genesis of this book is old pictures of my maternal grandmother. My parents are here, by the way. My mom's mother. She just looks gorgeous. She looks like a starlet. And I've always thought this, but I think as I came into my adulthood as first as a non-binary queer person, and specifically, these last years as a femme non-binary person, I read her femininity and her starletness differently. It rang really true to me, and it felt ancestral to me, which isn't to say, as I always say, I'm positing that everyone who looks kind of like they have really good femme swagger in some old photo is a queer femme. But it's more that, like, I started to think, given both Eastern European Jewish history and sort of like erasures and destruction there, and also erasures of sort of queer and trans lives, if I did have queer and trans ancestors, I wouldn't necessarily know. So what would it be like to sort of, to imagine that I did? And that, the sort of sartorial excitement and connection I felt about an ancestor meant something more than I could know. And so that was just really, really fun to speculate into. And because, I'm generally a very forgetful person. I have a terrible memory. And also history and families are forgetful. And so it was really fun to use the Jewish folklore I grew up loving, as well as sort of a queer sense of possibility to make a bunch of shit up, to fill in the blanks. It was really, really powerful experience and playful.
I think that, one thing that the game that I've played with my family is, if we were in a safer time because it's often, for Jews and for, unfortunately, a lot of people, and especially diasporic people, it's a safer time, not necessarily a safe time in history for us. Like, what would we have done and who would we have been? And I've always been like, would I have been in some kinds of lavender marriage? Would I have been? And then eventually I was like, oh no, I know myself. I'm the Yenta. I'm in everybody's business already. Yes. So. And when I told that to my family, they were too enthusiastic to agree with me. But, they were like, oh, yeah, you totally are. And I was like, okay, you didn't need to. Yeah, oh, yeah, you're in everybody's business. And I was like, okay, I can say that. But, yeah, I do think there is a lot of this like connection back then. And it's, I do think also that one thing that I don't know if you ever read All of a Kind Family. Yeah.
I love All of a Kind Family.
Yeah, yes, after All of a Kind Family. But those were books that were very important to me growing up. And I read a biography of the author a couple years back. And one of the things they said there was that they talk about how one of the daughters, Charlotte, has a crush on one of her teachers. But what they wrote in the book kind of blew my mind and also just made everything so clear. And it was that it was expected at the time that, young feminine people would have crushes on, feminine people in their lives, but that they would grow out of it because it was not so much about who you really loved. It was about responsibility, and responsibility meant, you have to marry a man and you have to have children because that is responsibility to your community. So there were lots of people who had these experiences when they were young and then just kind of had to, put down who they were in order to live life. And it's a very, or live, these very secret lives. And that I think is something that, is something that your characters do. They live these secret lives. And there are so many secrets. I think in so many ways, this book is about secrets, and it's about uncovering secrets, and also the secrets that you can't really uncover.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think like we're all so unknowable in a way that, I don't know. I think part of writing this book, I wrote a lot of this book. There are sections that appear that are epistolary, that are like letters. And as I was writing the book, I tapped into this fantasy that like, it just felt so, I was like, I wish I could just find a box of like love letters between, some ancestor and some other ancestor or someone else. And, just sort of, a queer love story, just all nicely boxed up for me to sort of find, there's this desire for like a really neat family secret to be revealed. And I wanted the letters to sort of exist in the ether of this book. But I know that most of us don't have access to those letters. So I wanted the reader to have access to the letters. The characters in the book only have a little bit of access. But yeah, absolutely. I think some secrets are unrevealable. And that's, again, why I think the imagination and the sort of radical imagination, the queer imagination, the Jewish folkloric imagination really allowed me to just kind of lean into every curiosity, every secret, every coincidence. And just like, we can't know we can't know all of what happened, but we can tell stories.
I think that one thing, and that leads me to, I think, something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is it makes sense to me that like the idea of the way that I describe this book, I don't know if this is a term you would use, but when I described it to friends, I would say it's a bit magical realism. And I don't know if that's just how I interpreted it, but I think that magical realism and Judaism to me go very much together, because I think that there is something there that is all about mystery and all about discovery and all about so much history and so many. I think the deeper you get into Jewish folklore, the more I would say the stranger it gets and the more wonderfully weird it gets, but also it makes sense, and it makes more sense and less sense at the same time, I think. And it is very much about words, and it is very much about the power of words and metaphor and all of these things. And so I was wondering if that is something that you feel that you see in Jewish literature. You know, I do think that magical realism in a way is I don't know. I think I often associate it with Latin America and things like that, but I do think that there is something magical and fantastical also about Jewish folklore stories as well.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I conversationally call this book a speculative queer history of an Eastern European Jewish family. And the speculative part is partially what I've been talking about in terms of, there's some stuff based on the timeline of my actual family. A lot of the places in this book are my family's places, the timeline, some details, but the rest is, first of all, obviously fiction, but also, people are always like, you must have done so much research. And there was research, but there's a lot of sort of speculation. But two, I think what you're talking about, the magic, is, I was raised, every Friday night, every Shabbos, we would sit around and read Jewish folklore. And it's bananas. Like, I mean, don't get me started on the Talmud, but that's not what this book is about. Like, but it's so.
Even Herschel and the Hanukkah goblins is kind of weird.
Yeah, totally. I want a Venn diagram of like that and the Talmud.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think like you're right. Like the folklore that really formed like a lot of my imagination is so deeply strange in this wonderful, playful way. And also in this way that I think I grew up not ever quite certain what was real and what was magic. And frankly, I think that has served me. I think that line being a little bit blurry sometimes is important. And I always say, someone asks me, do you believe in ghosts? I mean, the answer is yes. But I always say, like, I insist on ghosts. Like, even if I'm not feeling like in a believey mood, like I insist, because what is the point if there aren't ghosts? If there aren't like weird shape-shifting demons and chickens getting married and like, boys who lay eggs and all of this. And so I don't know. I think I wanted to write a book as I have thought of it, where theorems of wonder can be proven true. And that's not always possible IRL.
That's a beautiful phrase, though, that theorems of wonder can be proven true. And I think that is very much like the Jewish experience. I also have found that I think a lot of Jewish literature tends, I've read some of the Jewish literature I've read, I feel like it either is very much, sort of Jewish American Reform tradition, or, super like Hasidic or Orthodox. And there isn't as much regard, I've thought, given to modern Orthodox, or how I would say, the way that I say that I was raised was conservadox. And the best way I think to describe that is we went to an Orthodox synagogue, but it was 2 towns over in Los Angeles. So we would drive halfway and then get out and walk the rest of the way.
Classic.
We didn't have lights on or anything else on Shabbos, but yeah, so that was my experience growing up. And I had people recently tell me, they're like, oh, you must have like gone to a bunch of really fun bar mitzvahs in LA. And I was like, no, we grew up more observant than that. And somebody recently said to me, oh, I get it, your Haim sister's Jewish. And I think that's probably the best way to explain it. But, now I also, so much of this I read, and like, I didn't go to a Jewish day school, but I had a lot of friends that did. And, reading this, I was just like, oh, right. I remember we would do that, and we would do that, and we would do that, and brought back so many memories. So I think that, writing about conservative and writing about modern Orthodox, which, I think, first of all, I would also say, this is a separate topic, but I think the idea of, Reform, conservative, and Orthodox is pretty outdated. But I do think that modern Orthodox is something that hasn't, in my, personal opinion or experience, been explored as much in literature. And I was wondering if you would agree and if you would like to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, it's pretty niche, I think. Like, I think you're absolutely right. Like, I know that there are books by plenty of books by modern Orthodox people and plenty that treat the subject, but I'm not super familiar with too many of them. Yeah. And for me, it's as simple as like, this is my Jewish experience, and it's this is a theme. It's so weird and specific that the contours of it are actually really interesting to me to write about. It's that thing where you sort of defamiliarize the thing that has been so deeply familiar to you, because as soon as you step away from it a little bit, you realize, wow, that's what I was doing is not what everyone else was doing.
Well, it's often said that scientific discoveries come not from eureka, but from, that's odd. And I think that a lot of writing comes from that too.
Absolutely.
It doesn't come from, oh my gosh, the muse. It comes from, oh yeah, that was kind of strange, wasn't it? So yeah, I do think that, I don't know about the sort of, categorical imperative of write what you know, but I do think that there is something very beautiful in writing what you know and also writing what you're interested in.
Yeah, and I think too, like, there's this, maybe some folks know, there's this Yiddish idea of Doigkeit. It means here-ness. Mm-hmm. And it was actually, that idea was really central to the Bund, the Yiddish labor movement. And it was actually like an alternative to the Zionist movement. It was like, here, diaspora, this is where we do our mutual aid, this is where we do our organizing, this is where we build our lives. And so I think, diaspora Judaism, not necessarily religious Judaism in any way, but sort of a diasporic Judaism feels really central to me. And, I think especially right now, as there's, a genocide unfolding in Gaza, I am leaning so heavily on diaspora and really rooted in a diasporic movement of Jews and other people who are trying to dream a world that has a rich Jewish diaspora in it, and that is based in supporting other people.
Yeah, I think that is a very important,
I had to bring it into the room because it's so, it's so present. Like, it's such a joyous time, and also that doesn't go away. And so I think, of course, that's not what I was thinking about when I wrote the book necessarily, but I think it has grounded me in sort of releasing and celebrating this book, is that I am dreaming of a beautiful, thriving diasporic future where everyone can thrive and be safe.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that one of the most important lessons of Judaism is sort of a solidarity with oppressed people, because, never again for anybody, because we have suffered and other people have suffered as well. So I think that that is incredibly important. And yeah, I do think that there's it's also interesting because there isn't one way to be a Jew. You know, there's the old joke about the Jewish man who is on a desert island and he builds both a synagogue for himself and then the synagogue he would never ever go to. It is very, I think that, you know, it is funny to me how we are both so individual in some ways, but also so much about community and connection in others. And I think that really that is what Judaism is about. It is community and connection and remembrance and solidarity.
Yes, and
yes.
complaining. Also.
and complaining, yes. That if there's one thing that unites all Jews, you know, it's kvetching and figure out, yes.
That's a sound I make. My partner is always like, why do you make so many sounds when you sit down, you get up? I'm like, ugh, what a day. Like, I've literally been sitting at my laptop. I got my latte. I'm like, ugh. Okay.
There's so much, but I think also there's joy in Judaism as well. And this is a book with so much joy and beauty in it. And, you know, recording this for me was a joyful experience in many ways, and also a bit nerve-wracking because I've done a lot of books that I've been fortunate that most of the books I've narrated, and I think I've done probably about 30 now, 25 to 30. Most of the books that I've done I've really liked. But some, especially, I go, oh, this is a special one. This is one that means a lot to me. And, you know, this was somebody like I loved looking into the Boons and looking into Ansky and all of these things, you know, and I had been for so long, and they did the Dybbuk at my college and I wasn't able to get tickets to see it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly, pardon my expression, but this is exactly my shit. And so I was when I was doing it, you know, the people working with me were like, how are you feeling about this? And I was like, well, I just really like it, and I want to make sure that I do a good job and I don't mess up the Polish. So it was a bit nerve-wracking, but it was, you know, it also felt like a joy. And that was something that I really liked about it, was that there's so much joy in it. There's queer joy in it. There's Jewish joy in it. There's magical joy in it. There's, you know, a lot of joy amidst the sadness, I think.
I love that you found the joy. I mean, I think there's a Yiddish word, I believe, that means laughter into crying, which always also makes me think of the laughing crying emoji, which so when I use it, it feels like Yiddish. But I do just think, you know, the joy, the double-sided coin of sort of joy and grief is very present in this book, and also just very Jewish. I think they both kind of need to be there, and I feel like you really infused the audiobook narration with that, and I feel so privileged that I get to sit next to you and hear you read and talk about it.
Yes, well, thank you so much. And now that I have a massive head and I'm totally full of myself, let's open it up to the audience to ask some questions. Let's see. Hi, yes.
Okay. Temim, congratulations.
Thank you.
So happy for this book to reach readers. One of the things that I loved about this book was that you write these spooky, mysterious, magical themes, and I felt so they embodied in those themes. Can you talk about that process of writing these very sensorial, spooky scenes? What was that process like for you?
So what was the process of writing the very, you know, sensorial, spooky scenes in this book like for you?
Thanks, Hannah. It was so much fun. You know, I think I love some delicious sensorial spookiness. I think I write often to have a little bit more of a body. I think writing embodies me as cerebral as it can be. I'm very much an external processor, and sometimes I feel it takes me writing something to sort of feel it in my body. So I think in some ways the sensorial spookiness that appears in the book was just kind of me moving through the halls and frequencies of, Jewish folklore and spirits and, the kinds of mysteries I was curious about and the kinds of mysteries my characters were curious about, and just kind of putting myself in there and seeing what, sort of excited me and scared me.
All right. Let's see, more questions? Yes?
Hi, Temim. Congratulations. I had a question about just like the process of writing the book for you, which you've written so beautifully and spoken so beautifully about the years of living and traveling and just loving and being in the world that went into writing the book. When you read it, when you read it now and revisit it, do you feel like you are revisiting versions of yourselves? And how does that translate for you in the writing process, like revisiting parts of yourself that you were when you were writing certain scenes?
That's a great question. So I'm just going to repeat for some of the live stream people. So when you visit the things that you wrote several years ago, does it feel like you're revisiting older parts of yourself?
Thanks, Gina. I love that question. Yes, it does. I mean, I think anyone here who's written a book or is writing a book or has even read a book, probably understands that, you start a book and it takes, probably years or at the very least months if you're very speedy to finish it. So, yeah, I mean, I think I read parts of this and I remember the book kind of came in layers. So initially it was sort of linked short stories. Someone's here from my MFA workshop, and I was writing these little short stories, and then they sort of very quickly announced themselves as a novel. I thought this is going to need to be like threaded together and Frankensteined in a sort of bigger way. But yeah, I sort of see each layer. Like there were, these little stories, and then I knew that the great grandmother had to come in, and I didn't know how. I brought her in through letters. And then, over time, I think I got to know the characters too. Like, I think I wasn't, I was no spring chicken, but I think I was like, I was younger when I started. And then, I started growing a little bit closer in age to the character Hannah in my book, who's in her mid-50s. And so I don't know, that's an interesting process too, of like getting to know the characters more deeply, what I connect with each of them about, and how I made them more robust on the page.
All right, more questions? Hi.
I'm curious how your relationship with your grandmother changed while writing the book.
Oh, so how does your relationship with your grandmother change? How did that change while you were writing the book?
That's my sister-in-law, author of the brilliant Roman Jewish cookbook, Portico. Go get it online. It's very good. That is such a good question. The thing I want to say is that my grandmother had a costume ring, like a gold ring with like a fake amber stone in it. And I used to wear it everywhere I thought she would be proud I was going. So like if I was going somewhere fancy, like not that I'm frequent the opera, but like say I were to go to the opera, I would definitely wear the ring because Safta would be like, okay, you're going to the opera. I very sadly lost that ring permanently, I think, this past summer. But I would have been wearing it tonight because I think, that something about her was that she was always excited by like sort of events. And I don't know, she probably liked my dress. But I think obviously the character in the book is not my grandmother, but my relationship with her changed because I think I've just been communing with her a lot, spending in some ways more time with her, in death than I spent with her in life, which I spent a good bit of time with her. But friends and I have talked recently about, when our ancestors, pass on, do they still evolve? Do they change their minds? And I often, I ask my grandmother that, I ask my ancestors that, like, what do you think? Like, what do you think about what I'm doing? Like, how would you feel about, my politics, my relationships? What would yours look like at this point? So I think in a sort of speculative way, it certainly has changed.
That is very beautiful, I think. I sometimes feel like I don't think that my like I wonder sometimes, like, oh, how would my ancestors feel about my queerness? And I'm like, well, they'd probably just be like, but can you find a Jewish girl?
Real.
Yeah. All right. Any more questions? Yes.
Can you talk about any scene that was left on the cutting room floor?
Oh, cutting room floor scenes.
My agent, Stephanie Delman. The best agent. Didn't I just say what a bad memory I have? Like, do I even remember? Like, do you remember? Cutting room floor. Okay. Yes. Okay. I have one. There were a series of, like, as though this book isn't long enough, verbose, there were a series of kind of full folk tales that I made up, like full short stories. Like, there was one about a chicken wedding, 2 chickens getting married. There was one about a boy who had a fish's eye or something. Something? The chicken wedding. Let's go with the chicken wedding. Great story. Eventually, it didn't really have a place, in its sort of full glory, though it still gets a shout out. But, I am so lucky to work with Stephanie and my editor, Amy, and the whole team at Grove, who, maybe it's cliche. I don't know if it is. I don't think it is. It shouldn't be, because it's true. They just really made the book so much more what it was supposed to be, so much more itself. And so the cutting room floor is littered with, folk tales that no longer belonged, and that's fine.
Okay, but second book, short story, unless you already have a second book underway, I think, then perhaps third or fourth book. I would read short. Yeah, I would love to read some, folk tales like that. A chicken wedding? Absolutely.
Chicken wedding 2028.
Yes. Boy with a fisheye? Absolutely.
Yes. Let's do it.
All right. Yes. Yes, let's talk a little bit about the cover, which we have been discussing. I match, which was, I think, an accident. Perhaps not. Perhaps subconsciously not. But yeah, I match it right now. So let's talk about this gorgeous cover.
Hi, Marie. Marie Helene Bertino's book came out the same day as mine, Beautyland. It's so good. It's so good. The cover is my favorite thing. Thanks again to Grove Atlantic for, I sent Amy a very, very detailed email being like, here's what I do like, here's what I don't like, and you liked it. I like saturated color, and I like this texture and that texture, but I don't like this. And this was the first option that they came up with, and I fell in love with it immediately. I think what it means to me is there's a sense of simultaneity that I was thinking about while writing the book, in terms of in terms of generations and in terms of time. That sort of everything is always happening, and there are so many frequencies playing, and it sort of just depends which one we want to tune into, and maybe sometimes we can tune into more than one. But that sort of simultaneity and multiplicity really feels reflected on the cover. Also, it's a book about desire, and I think the cover is kind of hot. I think it's sexy and fun and a little bit sinister, but also a little bit flirtatious and playful. Everyone's here, everyone's here. This room is full. It's full with you guys, but it's also full in ways that we can't see. And I wanted that to be captured in the image, and it totally was.
Well said. All right. Any other? We have one left. Okay, we have time for one more. Yes.
So, because she was your protagonist, you have to love her. But do you have an underdog favorite character that was just delicious to write, that you were happy to spend time with?
Oh, who is the underdog favorite character that you loved spending time with?
Well, I will first say that everybody who's read the book is like, Shiva is the protagonist. And I'm like, hey, I'm kind of a Hannah, love Hannah. I felt very close to her. But I think Marla Garfinkel, the funeral home owner.
Okay. Thank you for saying that because she was one of my favorite characters to voice. Absolutely.
She was a favorite, delicious to write. And then Mel Rosen, the like obnoxious professor, was
fun too.
Just like a little bit of therapy to write him. That's a great question. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely a great question. And I definitely agree. Those were fun to play too. So thank you for writing them so beautifully. And they are, you know, I mean, he is obnoxious and she is, you know, a bit fun and ridiculous and over the top, but they are both very, very real. So thank you for making them real in addition to a little bit ridiculous. But I think that's kind of what this book is all about. Real and a little bit ridiculous too. So, all right. So do you have any last things that we should say before we start with meeting and signing?
Thank you all so much for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mara, so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you all so much for coming out. Thank you to everyone who asked questions. Thank you to Mara for moderating such a great conversation. And of course, thank you to Temim for celebrating this launch with us. So just a few quick reminders before we wrap up. If you're still with us on the live stream, you can buy a copy of the book by clicking the link in the live stream description. For those of you with us tonight, I believe we have 7 copies left. So if you haven't gotten it yet, you can do so at the front register where you checked in. And if you want another copy, you better act fast. Temim will be around to sign and personalize your books. That's going to be happening at the alcove where my coworker Anna is pointing to. It'll make a little bit more sense in a minute. We just ask that you please gather all of your personal belongings, line up down the center aisle, and kind of curve around to the wall. Because there are so many of you here, we ask that you please hold your hugs and kisses and words of affection for Temim until you get to her in the line, just so that we can get things moving. But that's all. Let's give these two one last round of applause. Thank you all so much again.